Wear a baseball cap here. I think we have to be punctual because we have people online. This in my ears sounds very loud. How does it sound to you? It's okay? Then I'll turn down my hearing aids. Yeah, so we'll start at 4 sharp. You tell me when it's 4 sharp, then I'll start, right? Now it's 4 sharp. So at 4 sharp, I'm really pleased to welcome you to this session on Voices from the Field, we call it, focusing on source to sea actions. And why we focus on actions, this is a momentous time for source to sea. We had strong freshwater input into the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon last year. We had a strong ocean input into the UN Water Conference this year. So what we are seeing is that these silos that the freshwater community on the one and the ocean represent are gradually sort of reducing. And source to sea is what is making the link between our two communities. And I think you will know a lot more about source to sea in 1.5 hours. So I'm not going to tell you, but only say that source to sea, our big challenge is precisely that one, silos. Silos between communities, silos between institutions, dealing with freshwater on one hand, ocean on the other, silos between SDGs, SDG 6, SDG 14, and so forth. But we know that our oceans are deteriorating badly because of pollutants, nutrients, plastic, all kind of stuff coming from our rivers. And it's our responsibility to manage it, but we don't really talk with those at the other end. Climate change makes it all worse. And with climate change, we also get more sea to source, with sea level rise accelerating, increased cyclones and so forth. So we have a serious issue. And the way to address the issue and what we call the source to sea approach is simply to try to get coordinating mechanisms between us. It's that simple. So that is the short version, the 1-minute version of what source to sea is. What have we done with it? Not much. I mean, some of us tried back in 2001 with to start something. It didn't fly. But 10 years ago, we started this platform. And slowly it's grown. And the platform is now more than 40 partners. International, regional, national institutions from government, international, civil society, and private sector. And the momentum is growing. The platform was invented by and created by CIVI. And CIVI hosts the platform. I think you will meet Ruth, who is our coordinator and chairing our secretariat. You will see Gustav, Gustav, you're there. And Jose, you have seen mails from him. Where's Jose? There. So Stockholm Water Institute is really managing this, and I've been chairing it for the last 10 years. And the good news is that this year we will find new blood to do that. The sessions we have here is trying to look at this by setting the stage. A Swedish agency and Roots would set the stage. We have 2 case study presentations to inspire us. We then have Audrey from Deltares moderating a panel discussion. And then we have 2 people, James from IUCN and Heidi from UNEP, to wrap the whole thing up. As you can see, we are stressed, so we are pressed for time. Everybody has been given X minutes, and like in football, we give you a discreet warning when you have 1 minute left, right, Gustav? And a less discreet warning when you are up. So Gustav, you will be managing this. With this, let me then introduce the first 2 speakers. I mean, it's a joint thing. I get the red one. You see? Yeah. Walking, yeah. The 2 speakers is Thomas Thomas Klein from the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management, and Ruth Matthews, our coordinator. And you will together set the scene. Please.
Okay, yes, thank you very much, Torkil. Great pleasure to see so many people here in the room and many people following us online. My name is Thomas Klein, working with the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management, and together with my colleague Ruth Matthews from SEWE, we will give a short introduction before we will then hear more about very interesting stories from different parts of the world. And I would say we're gathering here at the World Water Week 2023 at a very important time for humankind and the planet. As you know, we have the Agenda 2030, which provides us with a blueprint for peace, prosperity for people and the planet, for us and for forthcoming generations. And water is absolutely critical for this. It's central to the whole agenda. It connects to all other sustainable development goals. And by coming together here today, talking about good water management from source to sea, we really can make a significant contribution. So let me just say a few words on the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management. It is a governmental agency that was established in 2011, and actually it was established with source to sea at the core, because we have both freshwater and marine, so there was an idea behind this. Protect, restore, ensure sustainable use of freshwater resources and seas, and this also includes fisheries management. And you can see the political goals, policies, and the processes that steer and guide our work. We have national environmental quality goals in Sweden. We have the EU law as a very important component, regional and international conventions, and of course the global sustainable development arena. And all this together is the playing field. This is the arena where we need to come together to achieve good water governance, good water management from source to sea. And the figure that you can see here to the right is actually an illustration of some elements of source to sea. It's not complete, but some important elements. And you can see the different system components. You have the land, the freshwater, the coast, all the way to the sea. And then you have flows in this continuum. You have water, of course, but you also have pollutants, materials, and biota. And all this together, this is the foundation. This is actually the environment, Earth bearing up us as human beings, bearing up us with our socio-economic activities, providing us with ecosystem services, with good water, clean water, with food, with support to climate change adaptation, and of course with renewable energy. Let me give you two examples of source to sea in practice. Since we're here in Stockholm, we have the Baltic Sea outside. And one thing that the Baltic Sea has a problem with is eutrophication. And eutrophication has, of course, to do with many years of excess input of nutrients, and that in turn has to do with what we do on land. Agriculture, forestry, households, and many more. A classical source to sea issue. Another problem that I would like to mention is the large-scale changes that have occurred in the freshwater ecology due to hydropower. Hydropower is a very important component of our energy system. It's renewable energy, so it's very important if we want to achieve the Paris Agreement and climate change mitigation, but it's the single most important pressure on the freshwater ecology. It breaks this continuum of source to sea. It breaks the connectivity, prevents fish from migrating. For instance, we have salmon trying to go upstreams for spawning. We have the eel who wants to go downstream all the way to the Sargasso Sea. And this has repercussions on our ability to have a sustainable blue marine economy, sustainable fish stocks, another source to sea example. So source to sea is really something that we work a lot with in practice. So a few words on our international work. We work quite a lot internationally, and internationally we are guided by, we have development cooperation, we work a lot bilaterally with different countries, and we also have conventions and processes. And source to sea is both a thematic area in our international work, but also a cross-cutting concept. And we arrived at the stage where we thought it was time for some stock taking, getting an idea, where are we when it comes to source to sea management? Take a deeper look into what different actors are doing, countries, and try to find out what are the commonalities, what are the lessons learned, what recommendations can we give from that? What are the shared insights for us as an agency, but also for the global community? And we are very, very happy today to actually, for the first time, present a new report that the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management commissioned and financed, and that CIWI, as an expert organization, wrote for us. So this report is really about how we can build momentum to accelerate adoption of source-to-sea management, and how we can look at the different lessons learned and the recommendations, and there we will look at several case studies. So it's with great pleasure that I will hand over now to Ruth, who is lead author of the synthesis report and who will guide us through the key findings. Ruth, take it away.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and also to highlight some of the incentives to take up source-to-sea and adopt source-to-sea management, in that it really does support not only healthy ecosystems, but all the economic values that come to us from ecosystem services. And so I was very fortunate to be able to have the opportunity to look at these case studies and try to do some analysis to understand what we were learning from them. I can explain that these were the very initial case studies that were done by the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management. There were 5 case studies from their international and bilateral cooperation, and then 2 pilot projects that CIWI implemented, and we included those in the analysis. This table shows an overview of the case studies, and what I want to point out here is that the countries that were included in the case studies included China and the whole Baltic Sea region, Russia, South Africa, Sweden, Finland, Ethiopia, Vietnam. So that gives you a sense that this isn't something that happens in one part of the world, but can be applicable anywhere. It also included cases from basins that were 1,400 square kilometers versus 1.7 million square kilometers. So again, it shows the ability to address these different aspects. It was very important for us to understand that there are processes, ongoing processes in which we can then reach into to incorporate source-to-sea thinking and source-to-sea management, and to address these different flows that Thomas mentioned already. One of the things that came out that was really important learning is that there are different readiness levels for source-to-sea management. That in some cases it's really at the level of awareness raising, where we really need to begin with the building the understanding that there is a holistic system there, that land, freshwater, coastal and marine ecosystems actually operate as one unit, and so we need to be able to manage them in that one unit. Once that awareness is there, then the focus changes towards mechanisms to create that coordination between the different sectors across the source-to-sea continuum, and to be able to engage upstream and downstream partners. And then the final stage is more where the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management is we are actually implementing source-to-sea management and taking action on the ground with that. So some of the strengths that came out are that it is applicable to a wide range of objectives, a lot of flexibility in the application of the source-to-sea approach to address these different readiness levels, the ability to adapt to the local context, and build agreement going forward. Some of the limitations, and this is what this session is specifically about, is that we don't have many examples yet. So we're building up a case of examples so that we really understand what's available there. So looking forward, I'll have to go through these quickly because I'm seeing my cards. We need to raise awareness at all levels of governance and really mainstream source-to-sea thinking in all ways. We need to stimulate more investment into understanding these linkages, not just at the biophysical level, but the social and economic levels. We need to actually invest in that holistic management and build the evidence base. We need to develop capacity. It's a change of behavior to have this coordination across sectors, to include stakeholders from all different sectors, parts of the basin. And we need to find those innovative, transformative, and replicable, scalable solutions that we can then apply throughout many locations. So with that, I will close my brief snapshot. This report is now published. The link is here. We can also help support you if you can't get the link right now. But I hope you have a chance to look at the report. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Thomas and Ruth, for setting the stage. And as I promised you, now you know more about source-to-sea. Thomas's diagram is actually part of our basic framework for this, and I think these slides will be available. And if you look at that, you get it in a nutshell. So thank you for two great introductions. We now move to two examples of case studies. They will be online. One from Wetlands International in Argentina and one from the European Environment Agency. So I hope everything works. I just trust that, because now I'm going to invite Gaston Fulquet. I don't know if I pronounced you right. You are the regional manager for the Corridor Azul program, which is the Paraná-Paraguay wetlands system. So Mustafa, you have 5 minutes, please.
Area which is the largest second basin in all South America.
Excuse me, Mustafa, we can still not see you. Just a second. Just a second. We have some technology issues here. We cannot see you. This is the beginning of Water Week. I'm sure a lot of the first session will scramble a bit before it all works. So let's see. We can't get the visual?
Yeah, they're working on it, so maybe we can get the slides going and they can present them, and then we just keep talking.
He's working on it. Get watch line, but watch lines. But do they have the slides?
We have the slides.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. But then, if we could get the slides going, let's do that. And Mustafa, then we will.
It's Gaston.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So Gaston. Sorry, this is a bit complicated, and I'm sorry to jump in here, Torkil. We can change the slides. So if you just tell us next slide, we have on the title slide now, then you can go ahead and we can hear you. You're back.
Okay, there we go. Okay.
All right.
All over again. Welcome, Gaston, and welcome to this. We look forward to your 5 golden minutes on what's happening in Paraná, Paraguay. Gaston, please.
All right, thank you for the invitation again. As I was saying, I'll take you on a trip to South America, to the La Plata Basin, which is the second largest basin in the region after the Amazon. And we are working within that basin along the Paraná-Paraguay corridor. So if you can move to the next slide, please. I'll share a little bit of the Corredor Azul program, which is a wetlands international initiative in South America, aiming to safeguard the health and connectivity of the Paraná-Paraguay fluvial corridor and its wetlands. As one of the last free-flowing water systems in the world, along its 3,600 kilometers, it connects the Pantanal up in the north with the Paraná Delta in the south, right before it exits the La Plata River, and finally the southern Atlantic Ocean. So we are talking about a source to sea case here. This corridor is not only essential because of the huge volume of water it transports, but sediments, nutrients, seeds, fish, and a variety of other living organisms that help maintain its productivity and diversity are also key elements to be valued in the upstream downstream nexus. So moving next to the next slide, Pantanal, Ibera Marshes, and the Paraná Delta are the three macro wetland landscapes that horizontally connect the Paraná-Paraguay system with other key ecosystems, such as the Cerrado, the Paranaense forest, and the grasslands all along the corridor. And that comprises a total area of 18 million hectares of wetlands that are vital for life and development in South America. This area is so important that all along this corridor, just along this corridor, we find 10 Ramsar sites. So this expresses the relevance of wetlands in the region. Moving to the next slide, we have two images above of the same sector of the Paraná Delta, which expresses the importance of wetlands elasticity, both temporarily and spatially. So we see how it behaves in periods of drought and flood, and changes in the climate, and especially in the rain regime affecting the region over the past decades, have made visible how vital that horizontal connectivity between the riverbed and the wetlands is for nature and society, as wetlands perform key socio-ecosystemic functions that help reduce risks during periods of either floods or droughts. So moving into the next one, we see some series of activities affecting that connectivity. This corridor still maintains a relatively good state of health and ecosystem integrity. However, there are rapid land use changes that are taking place, driven either by agriculture and urban expansion, industrial or harbor developments, dredging for fluvial transport, and infrastructure works that modify and affect that ecological integrity and hydrological function of this system. So in that context, the Corredor Azul program is contributing to a more holistic understanding and management of this corridor by also increasing the fluxes of wetland-specific technical information across main stakeholders with capacity to actually affect the future of this corridor in multiple levels, from the regional to the local perspective. Next, please. So at the regional level, international financial institutions intervening in the development of infrastructure investment projects that we have been working with include the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, Plata, and CAF. So these are some of the actors we have been interacting with over the last few years. Now, these institutions play a key role as catalysts of investments in the region by formulating, approving, assessing, and following up infrastructure projects. Nonetheless, when these projects are developed on wetland landscapes specifically, we observe a set of limitations for assessing their environmental impacts. And under the source-to-sea management approach, Corredor Azul has created dialogue spaces and collaborations with these institutions for incorporating wetlands best practices and knowledge that enable more responsible investments to ensure that connectivity and health of the system. Now, how did we manage to bring international financial institutions to the table? We started out by taking advantage of development banks' recognition of Ramsar sites as critical habitats in order to engage with those acting in South America. And for a period of 3 years, we developed a continuous work of consultation and exchange to agree on how to better incorporate wetlands in environmental impact studies in specific. So we started out by mapping investments in infrastructure projects by these institutions that they are financing to offer terms of reference for typical infrastructure projects in wetlands to be considered in the stage of environmental impact study, which is part of a larger process of environmental impact assessment. What role did knowledge have in this? Well, we follow up Ramsar's resolutions calling on the fundamental role of environmental impact studies to conserve wetlands ecological character, and we developed that handbook with technical guidelines for better incorporating wetlands in environmental impact studies. A lot of technical information on the delimitation and characterization of wetlands under the National Wetlands Inventory has progressed significantly over the last 5 years in South America. And this new source of scientific information was key to better incorporating the eco-hydro-geomorphological approach into environmental impact study. Now, do we see changes in behavior by these institutions? I can say yes, we see there is a real interest in learning how wetlands function.
Can you hear me?
How to incorporate that.
No.
In early stages of decision-making processes before new infrastructure projects are developed. So we believe that us being a wetland-specific organization, very technical-oriented, provided the credentials for this sort of financial institutions to trust and engage in this initiative. And we have already carried out a training program for the staff in the Inter-American Development Bank in South America, and we hope to do the same with Fomplata. Now, remaining challenges to be overcome stand at the fact that international financial institutions respond to a national regulatory framework and also best practices required at a national level. So taking this to the basin level implies that also other countries of the basin adopt this approach to work. So involving intergovernmental basin agencies is required.
Excuse me, Gaston, can you hear me? Gaston? Can you hear me? Gaston, could you kindly wrap up because you are out of your 5 minutes? Could you kindly conclude?
Yes,
Thank you.
I was just getting to that point. Thank you, I'm sorry about that. I was mentioning that involving basin organisms at a regional level, such as La Plata Intergovernmental Committee, is the step needed in order for other countries to also adopt this approach when we think on the upstream. So we are moving into that, expanding that initiative from Argentina to other countries of the basin. Thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for the extra 2 or 3 minutes I took.
I don't know if you can hear our applause. And I think, again, as I said, this presentation will be available, and it brings home to us a source to sea is more than water and ocean, it's also land. It's wetlands, and La Plata is an international river. It's also very much part of the whole thing. So this was a very important case study. We now move to the next one, and this is Mustafa Aydin. When we asked for Mustafa's title, you said you were environmental expert on zero pollution. That's an ambitious title. So, Mustafa, you have 5 minutes, and we will give you a discrete sign when you have 1 minute left. Okay? Please.
Thank you so much. I hope you are hearing me, seeing me. It's a pleasure to be here. This has been like 3 years efforts that we before we published this report, and then of course it's so nice to be with the people who share the same ambition to curb pollution and to look at the sources of the pollution. I have an ambitious title because the European Union recently in 2021 published the Zero Pollution Action Plan, which also is ambitious and it looks at the problem as it in this report from source to sea, from production cycles, consumption cycles, and then the pathways, and finally this sink of the pollution. So I don't know if I will see my presentation or not here on the screen. I would like to start with it. I cannot see my presentation yet. Now, so like the report, the first slide, thank you so much. As you see on the right side, as I mentioned, we are not looking only to the rivers because our domain and ambition, we want the holistic picture of the marine litter and plastic pollution problem, which is relevant and related to the Green Deal, which is now the integration of the policies and the implementation of the policies and legislation is much explicit after the Green Deal in the European Union. And with the Circular Economy Action Plan and the Zero Pollution Action Plan, we wanted to look for the, first of all, to the design of the plastics, the packaging, the generation of the plastics, and then the waste management of the plastics, and then the rivers as pathways when you cannot manage the plastics, and finally the curb the pollution and the standards to sustain good environmental, good ecological, chemical status in the EU waters, including the rivers and the seas. And this is also much relevant to the UNEA plastic agreement, which initially started as only covering marine litter and now ended up with the whole picture, the whole plastic cycle. This infographic summarizes our findings and the approach from the source to see the holistic picture and provide the European policymakers a holistic picture of what's happening and to link the monitoring as the legislation is now being integrated. So the monitoring and assessments, in our opinion, should also be integrated. So this report was the attempt to provide this integration as a whole in the European Union on the plastic pollution and marine litter problem. The problem is, of course, we are consuming huge amount of plastics and it's increasing every year. And 85% of the marine litter is plastics. And even in COVID times, where the EU GDP was dropping, strikingly, the EU plastic packaging production generation was still increasing. As I said, the 40% of the driver of the plastic pollution is the economic sectors, and 40% of the plastic is the plastic packaging, where we focused that in this report. And although our waste management capacity is increasing in Europe between 2012 and 2018, our plastic generation is so much increasing over this capacity, then our plastic leakage is increasing. Approximately 3 million tons of plastic waste leaked to the environment in the EU, plastic solid waste, macro waste, between 2000 and 2018, and 80% of it leaked from the land-based sources. And the rivers especially, also there is a wind dimension which we didn't take account. Rivers carried most of this. We estimated that 626 million items are flowing into the European seas with an EU project estimation. And finally, we overlapped all possible marine litter types with a marine litter assessment tool and found out that 75% of the EU coastal areas are polluted with the marine litter and the plastic waste. Next slide, please. So the benefits of the projects were very clear. It's the first time holistic picture of the marine litter problem in Europe. It's trying to attempt to complete the puzzle pictures which no one had done, that starting from the production and consumption cycles. And at the end, this led us to be better informed the policymakers and allowed better integration, and also allowed better integration of the needs for the future, and brought all the stakeholders different, working in different silos, policymakers or the commission workers, and collected under one subject to different perspectives. Last slide. And we had some barriers we understood. Next slide, please. And they understood that the blacking issue was basically the riverine litter issue. It's a big problem in the marine litter problem. It's an emerging area. We don't have much data. We had a more or less complete picture of the sources, production, waste management capacities, and the pollution at the sea. But the marine riverine litter linkage was so much missing, and it was hard to interlink these problems in solid manners. In the next study in 2026, we will focus on this problem and enhance our knowledge and use better methodologies to have the full pictures of the puzzle, we hope. Thank you so much for your patience.
Excellent presentation with a lot of detailed information about marine litter that I think we would like to follow up in some ways through this platform. Excellent. This was an appetizer, 2 case studies from different parts of the world. Now, Audrey Legat, you are Senior Advisor on Water Governance and International Water Cooperation, right? Of Deltares in the Netherlands. And you will take over now, and you have a panel of 4 fantastic people. I suppose you will introduce them, you will manage them, you will pick their brains, have a good discussion, and hand back to us 12 minutes before closing. Do we have a deal on that?
We will do our best.
Okay, thank you.
I will ask the fantastic panel members to help me on that. Yeah, indeed. So now Ruth gave us a huge challenge actually to come with concrete examples to overcome one of the limitations that we still have. So we will now hear from 4, let's say, early adopters of the source-to-sea management approach. And they will share their experience with us on how they implemented the approach and what it meant also for their own case. So I will call now 4 panelists, starting with Silvia Kardaskia, who is a water resources specialist at the Asian Development Bank, where she leads projects, preparation and support policy dialogue with China and Mongolia. Silvia, you can join us here. And thank you very much, Dana, for bringing some water for panelists. Our second panelist will be Guoyi Han, who is a senior research fellow at the Stockholm Environmental Institute, and is specialist on the connection between nature and society. Guoyi, you can join us here on the stage. Thank you. Can you share a microphone together, maybe? Because we have 2 more panelists.
Sure. Thank you.
The third panelist will be Louise Egart, who is partnership and funding mobilization expert at DHI. And Louise will take us through a case in Myanmar. Welcome, Louise. Thank you for joining. And last but not least, we have Thomas Klein, who is already gave us a presentation at the start of this session, but I repeat, Head of Department of Environmental Analysis at the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management, an agency that was created on the idea of source-to-sea. Welcome. Yeah, will it be okay for a microphone? Good. So we will start with this panel discussion. We will have about 30 minutes, a bit less, where I will ask panelists to remain concise also in their answers. And Gustav, thank you for helping me with time management. Afterwards, we will have about 10 minutes for questions from the audience, so prepare your questions because we will have a time for some of them. But let's directly deep dive on the cases, and I will ask you also to focus on what we can learn actually from the implementation of source-to-sea work. Silvia, let me start with you, please. So the ADB has been working on a program for the Yellow River Basin in China, incorporating this aspect of source-to-sea perspectives. So could you tell us first more about the context in which you undertook your work, but also give us some insights on how the approach has actually brought added value in this program?
Okay, sure.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us. Just a brief introduction about the Yellow River. The Yellow River is the second largest river basin in China, and it originates in the Tibetan Plateau and it empties in the Bohai Sea. It's a very big basin. It's actually the size of a big country, and it provides ecosystem services to about 120 million people. So it's a very large-scale basin, and it's also important, of course, not only for the ecosystem services, but for the livelihoods on which people depend on. There are several issues in the basin, and I will just mention a few of them to introduce the program that we are implementing. So one of the most important issues is water scarcity. This is one of the most water-stressed basins in the world and in China. The second one that maybe many of you are familiar with is the sediment loads. The basin has a really huge soil erosion and degradation issues, especially in the middle reaches in the Lost Plateau, which is where actually it's from the sediment that the river takes the name and its color. So that also has impacts in terms of, that has downstream impacts in terms of both the sediment but also water-related risks in terms of flooding. And of course, all these impacts are exacerbated by climate change that makes it even worse. So all these challenges really require thinking about holistically about how integrated management of water resources, but specifically looking at how balancing and managing economic development and ecological protection through upstream, downstream management is quite important. That's when Source2Sea approach comes in to address some of the linkages between land, water, delta, and ocean ecosystems, really adopting holistic natural resources management. And that's where ADB actually comes in, where we finance quite a large program. It's about 1.8 billion lending and about 3.8 million technical assistance. We support the Chinese government, so we work with state actors mostly, but also with research institutes that come in with the knowledge that they have on the ground. And we work across, this is one of the innovations, we work across many agencies, not only at the national level, but also at the provincial level. So Ministry of Water, National Reform Commission, Ministry of Ecology and the Environment, but also at sub-provincial level. There is 7 provinces and 2 autonomous regions in the Yellow River Basin, and so it's very huge scale. So really one of the innovations is that we look at the basin management in a holistic way, and particularly looking at land use management. We work a lot on programs that are, for instance, ecological compensation programs, which is sort of the Chinese way to mean payment for ecosystem services. So we work with the government, the local governments, and with the farmers to actually really restore upstream protecting the water source in order to have less downstream impacts. So we really work across different scales with different actors, and what really adds value to this, it's not only that we work with institutions, but we also work on the institutional aspects, but also on the regulatory aspects. And so there is a law actually that was approved just last year in 2022. It's quite an ambitious law, I have to say. So it's now under implementation. And actually, this is also interesting for us because there is a law, but one of the main issues is also the implementation of the law. And the law really looks at all the aspects that I mentioned, from water quantity to water quality to the sediment issue to the flooding. And so it would be really important that this law actually is implemented in a way that looks not only at the state actors, but also the non-state actors. and how this is implemented, it's going to be a challenge.
Is the project still ongoing? Do you monitor also how the implementation is taken place, or?
Yeah, so the program actually started around 2020, and what I didn't mention is that it's not a project, it's a set of projects. There is 6 loans under implementation. Some of them are under implementation, and some of them are actually there's one under preparation. And there is 13 technical assistance projects. So it's quite a lot. If you're interested, I can share more. But in the interest of time, of course, I couldn't bring examples. But really, these projects, especially the technical assistance one, are quite interesting in terms of lessons learned and in terms of working with institutions and eco-compensation, etc.
Thank you, Sylvia. And I think you mentioned very important points. The first one is the ambition. You say it's an ambitious law, but I think we all agree that seeing the pressures and the challenges we have to be ambitious. So I think it's a good level to target. And the second aspect I really like that you bring also the sediment aspect. It's often forgotten in the source to sea approach. We have talked about plastic, we have talked about wetlands, but this sediment is really key also in the upstream, downstream consideration. And finally, the multi-level approach, which is also key of this source to sea management. Guoyi, I think you have also some experience in working with China, where we actually tried to bring more source-to-sea considerations in the collaboration between your institute and China. Can you tell a bit more? And I understood it did not really materialize so far, so can we learn a bit from that? Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. I think we will go through around this part, just very short. In terms of the experience part, I tell a little bit of story of a few failed attempt to establish a project explicitly around this concept of source to sea in our collaboration with our Chinese colleagues over the years. 2016, when Dr. Jakob Granit was with us and still part of SEI, and we made this a high priority. And Jakob and I traveled to China. I also say Frank is sitting there. Frank was also on the delegation, and we had the source to sea seminar in view of the Chinese major water resource and engineering. Start to introduce that. After that, we designed one in the Huai River Basin, and we discussed about the plastic one. Since that, there was science on nature, say, 80 or 90 plus of the world plastic actually came from 12 major rivers, and most of them are in Asia, and 2-3 of them are in China. So, but so on and so forth. So then is the water chief system, and led to us, and even the current thinking on the Yellow River we heard. But none of those materialized and funded project. Of course, there's many other reasons why project didn't get funded. But I'll just mention 2, stop here and reflect later perhaps. One is we found, at least during those conversations, still there's a tremendous difficulty communicating the essence of the project clearly and convincingly. And related to that is that immediately, especially my colleagues in China ask, do you have a model for this? Do you have, all pointing to, they look for a clear operational guide to how to apply this. And that we found also tremendously difficult. There's many other things. I'll just stop here to set the tone of that experience and a bit of learning, and then maybe we can come back to elaborate on what I mean by those.
Thank you, Guoyi. And just a question, is the development still ongoing, or did you stop at the moment?
Yeah, we are still. Our collaboration with China, of course, ongoing. The latest one, again, colleague from SWAM and half Frank is sitting there. For example, we had one under the China-Europe water platform that is really on the water energy nexus. And earlier Thomas talked about the hydropower. That was the central focus of that project. You can look at the changing role of the hydropower, how that change have range of manifestations, and including this.
Let's keep a bit of a focus on source to sea, but thank you so much for sharing this with us. And I wonder, Sylvia, because I mean, it's also a similar context, the Yellow River Basin. How do you look at that? The difficulty also to convince, to the lack of an operational guide. Is it something you encountered also in your case? Very briefly, if possible.
Yeah, I mean, we work with the government at a different level, but of course there is always the need to explain. I mean, when we're talking about integrated approaches, it means also that there are so many stakeholders in the room. Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, we did our first seminar in Henan province, which is where the Yellow River Commission is based. And we actually brought together two actors, that is the Yellow River Commission and the Ministry of Ecology and Environment. And it seems something easy, but it was actually one of the fewest cases where these two ministries, these two agencies were in the same room and were discussing common issues. So that seems like a very small thing, but actually in terms of multi-level cooperation, it's actually for us difficult sometimes. Yeah.
I think it shows also the importance actually to bring those cases and to have a bit more guidance and things we can share also on this source to sea approach. Thank you so much. Louise, I will come to you now because you have worked also in the Asian context, more specifically in Myanmar, where DHI has looked from a source to sea perspective also for a river basin. What was the setting of your work and what was the entry point?
Yes, thank you first of all for inviting us. We are a new member of the Source to Sea Action Platform, one of the private sector members. And we worked at the Awayadi River Basin, and I can say to begin with, the project has stopped since the coup d'etat in February 2021. But from 2018, so the context is the World Bank and the government of Myanmar, and in this case, the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Transportation, and Agriculture, the three ministries, and the World Bank said we need a master plan for this basin. And DHI came in together with local partners looking at the whole basin on how to develop a sustainable basin in terms of social, environmental, and economic possibilities. And I will come back to the more nitty-gritty details, but that was with an operational system, a so-called decision support system, in which we would have many indicators of what would happen if, for example, a hydropower station were placed on the river. How would that affect, for example, how many days of navigable time, when can ships, would that move from 100 days to 200 days, etc. But as I said, the project has been terminated by the World Bank. There is a draft master plan, but we don't know the status of it right now. And the river is 2,300 kilometers long, starting from the north of the country and going out to the delta and the sea, of course. And millions of people and animals are dependent on this basin.
Thank you. And the first developments that already took place, what kind of silos did we experience? Because the source to sea approach is actually a way to overcome also silo thinking, to address the linkages between land, deltas, water, estuary, and so on. So what are the silos that you could identify, and how did you try to address them?
So many silos from the different groups of people and different interests of people and companies and organizations living along the river. What we did about it, I can go directly to solutions, was really sitting down together and having a lot of conversations. And we want to say, especially this was important with our partners, the Hydroinformatics Center of Myanmar were key in these dialogues, One silo was language, a lot of ethnic groups in Myanmar, and lots of dialogues and lots of trying to explain and illustrate in a very easily way to what would change if this happens in the river, what decision can make and what consequences will it have. Mm-hmm. So really having everybody on board was one of the solutions for this communication. But silos, yes, there are lots, and the source to see platform and source to see approach is a good way to minimize these silos.
So we find back also what Sylvia was saying about sitting together and taking really time also to get familiar with the approach. Thank you, Louise. Thomas, moving a bit back to the European context. So from the cases that were presented, we went to Latin America and Europe. We went now to Asia, and let's come back to Europe with you, Thomas. Your agency was established based on the source-to-sea thinking. What does it mean actually for Sweden and maybe the region more largely? What are the changes that you have seen in the last years, and how the source-to-sea approach is reflected in those changes?
Thank you very much, Audrey. And when we started in 2011, of course, the idea was source to sea from the beginning. But since then, I would say we have learned a lot in our day-to-day operations, in the types of problems and challenges that we meet, but also the opportunities that we see. And I mentioned the importance to really see freshwater ecosystems, the freshwater environment, and the marine as a holistic system, and our ambitions to have a sustainable blue economy are directly depending on working healthy freshwater systems. And I mentioned hydropower. I will come back to that, but we also have another problem in Sweden when it comes to the freshwater systems. For 2 centuries or so, there has been a need to float timber in Sweden to the coast, and this has led to straightening many rivers and loss of biodiversity, spawning areas for the fish. We are now doing a lot of work on that in collaboration with the county boards to restore these rivers and to really restore the spawning areas, to re-establish the ecology in the freshwater systems, which then is beneficial also for the marine systems. And when it comes to hydropower, which we've been mentioning a lot, so of course hydropower is important for the energy system, as I said, for the climate goal, but also we have the ambition to have good freshwater environments. And one important thing that we have had from the beginning is the political will and the policy drivers, because we have the national goals which say we want to have healthy ecosystems in freshwater, but also we had the European Water Framework Directive, which really has been a driver, because the observation was the status that we have now in the freshwater systems, that's not what we wanted. That's not what we want to have according to the directive. So that was one important driver for a huge project that is now underway. It's a result of 10 years of work at least. And many consultations with all stakeholders. And the project is actually during the next 20 years of making all hydropower in Sweden environmentally sustainable. So all hydropower installations will need to get modern environmental permits. And as part of this undertaking, which now also is a legal act, so this is very important, as part of this undertaking, we did very extensive data analysis, and we heard this also from Gaston and Mustafa. It's really important that you do thorough data analysis so that you have a good understanding where are the hydropower installations, what is their respective contribution, what is their respective environmental impact, so that you have a good knowledge base. This is very important for the discussion, because when you have that, the discussion starts to be fact-based and all actors can relate to that and you can start to build a shared vision. So this project, of course, I cannot report on the results in 20 years when I will be back here, hopefully. So I will report back on the details, but we are really hopeful that this will help a lot towards our vision, achieving it all. because we not only want to achieve SDG 6 or SDG 13 or 14 or 15, we want to achieve it all. That's the nice part with Agenda 2030. And we really need to find ways to do that, and source to sea is a critical element in this.
And what are the lessons learned so far? I understand it's not yet, but can you already share some?
As I said, first of all, you will need to get everybody to the table, and political will and policy drivers are key for that, I would say. But also the organizations themselves. We're starting to learn the businesses themselves. They have an interest, they want to be environmentally compliant, that they want to support both SDG 13, but also have a support a working freshwater ecology. So the understanding is growing. Bringing everybody to the table is very important, and as I said, good data-driven analysis, and then I would say also good discussions. 8 years of dialogue and consultation, so that's really a long period, and we will continue to have dialogue all the way during the next 20 years. So this is important, but I would also say finance is really critical. And one thing that we have in Sweden is there's a private sector fund, hydropower environmental fund, that will help to the businesses to in this process to get the new modern environmental permits. Because it will cost a lot, it will cost a lot of effort, it will cost the businesses, all the agencies, it will be an enormous amount of workload for the courts, the environmental courts, but it's really helpful when there is finance to support this, in particular for the businesses, which now will need to get modern permits.
Thank you. I like how you sort of build upon each other, because you mentioned the dialogue, and now, Thomas, you complement, saying like, yes, but it has to be fact-based, so you need data analysis and so on. And yes, this idea of dialogue, and I hear also quite a lot about, the law side, legislation also related to that. So thank you for that. And I get a signal that we will have to wrap up soon, but before we go to questions from the audience, I would like to ask you, in your use actually of the source to sea approach, are there specific resources, tools, guidances, things that actually helped you or that you have developed and that you would like to share also maybe with others who would like to jump into this implementation of the source to sea approach? Would one of you would like to react on that?
I think from DHI's perspective, looking at the work that you've been doing for 10 years now and the Source to Sea platform, I used to work at Stockholm International Water Institute, so we've been following you very closely and taking inspiration. I cannot give a specific book or guidance. And then, of course, working with people, those of you who have worked in Myanmar probably know the founder of this hydroinformatics center. It's Dr. Nini, and characters like her is really pushing also this concept and is, I guess, learning by doing and by inspiration from these forerunners of Source to Sea is greatly appreciated, and this is what helps us going forward.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Louise. And
yeah, if it's just on that, adding not specific again the specific tools, but it's just add a few words of what motivated us, for example, back 2016, to promote this in China. I think it took us meaning myself and my colleagues, and have all this. I think in the room, everybody remember in the earlier days of Source to Sea, we always ask, what is new about this, right? Are you just relabeling everything? What is IWRM? And is this anything? So it took us a while to convince this is something different. And to me, a lot of people in the room probably disagree with me, but the key benefit or the huge thing that helped us a lot to convince this is something that worth to promote is take IWRM, essentially still see water as a resource. But the Source to Sea for us is broadening that. Is water is not just the resource, but it's also a carrier, also a connector, and a transporter. And by that, I think broadening a lot to help this, not just left bank and right bank and upstream, downstream, but both of the socioeconomic life flows in the river basin into the water governance questions. So that remain today, we see is, at least for me, the biggest selling point of this S2S. But again, communicating that effectively with the ready supporting tools and approaches, I think is remain a major barrier.
Thank you. Thomas, you want to add something?
Yes, I think I understand this is a good time to do some marketing. So, and as we were already hearing about the report Ruth just presented, so please have a look at that report, because there's a lot of lessons learned approaching using the source to sea approach in practice from many different case studies. And also the work that I presented here on the hydropower and restoration, it's all on our website. It's, of course, most of it is in Swedish. The English part is not that updated, but I think we'll have a look at that. So that's out there. And we also have a new concept on sustainable water resource management that's available as a report in English now. So please have a look at that. And that's also based on the source to sea concept.
Okay, enough to learn as follow-up of this session. I will continue, except Sylvia, if there is something you want to share, but very briefly in that case.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't have anything additional to share. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so we move to the question to the audience, but before, please mark your calendar, Ruth, Gustav, Dana, and Jose, because we will be back in 20 years, so if you can convene a session for Thomas to let us know how the project eventually ended, that's, we will be back. Okay, so from the audience and also online, so you will help us monitoring also the chat online. But I see already 2 questions. Maybe I will take first 2 questions here. Yes, here we go. And please indicate your name, organization if possible, and also if the question is directed to one specific panelist.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm Fernando Gonzalez from Mexico, consultant now. I left the public office long ago. The question is mainly for the Asian and the Swedish examples. We are ambitioning to change some agricultural practices, especially in the Pacific Sea of Cortez part of Mexico. We have 2 main problems when we speak about the health of that sea. And the first one is, of course, nitrogen and phosphorus. And the second one is the decommissioned and new minefields that are developing in the region. So those are the big chemical concerns of water quality and biodiversity threats on that sea. And so if you have any maybe in the Yellow River or somewhere else, do you have experiences in this technical assistance or financial programs to change agricultural practices and maybe some intervention or accountability on the mining side?
Thank you. And there was another question at the back.
Right, thank you. My name is Julie Mulonga. I work for Wetlands International, based in Nairobi, Kenya. Now, one is a comment and one is a question. For me, it's a real relief to hear that if you're really going to implement the source-to-sea approach, it actually takes a lot of time. And one of the things you really have to invest in is the dialogues and bringing people together. It can take 3 years, it can take more than 3 years. But I think the unfortunate thing when we deal with some of, let me call them the development partners, this is one thing that's not understood. you're implementing maybe a project for 5 years, and they're already asking you within 1 year, where are the results, you know? So maybe that's one thing we need to keep at the back of our minds when we really want to use the source to sea approach. The second one is a question. I've just come from a session where we've been talking about the global biodiversity framework. Maybe my question would be to Thomas. When you look at that GBF framework, really, how do you see it panning out for you in the work that you're doing? Thank you.
Thank you. I will start with the first question. Does one of the panelists want to react on the experience with technical assistance to change agricultural practices?
Maybe I can start on that. So in terms of, so the question was about nitrogen and like the phosphorus, so the pollutants from agriculture. That has been, in China is one of the main issues in terms of water quality, and especially in the Yellow River, because the Yellow River is basically the food basket of China. This is one of the main issues. So there, of course, there are different approaches. One is the regulatory side of things. If there are regulation against use of pesticides that the Ministry of Agriculture and Affairs has been promoting, and these are also cascading down at the provincial level and county level. So this is number one. And in terms of regulation, there's also what he mentioned as the river chief system, which is a way to monitor that then regulations are applied, there are water quality parameters that are set, etc. So this is one. Of course, it's difficult to monitor regulations because China is huge, and also because agriculture is not just polluting; it's also livelihoods, and it's important because farmers have to live, and not all farmers are rich. Actually, they struggle. So one of the innovative aspects that China has been working for 20 years, it's eco-compensation, which is, as I said, sort of payment for ecosystem services. And it works at different levels. It works with the farmers, it works with the counties, and it's basically a way to encourage sustainable agricultural practices. So it works with farmers, upstreams, and farmers are compensated. And so perhaps instead of doing intensive agriculture, they start doing something else, agroforestry, or they just do different crop production. So there's that. And in that way, that also has impacts downstream. So on the ecosystem, on the eco-compensation, there is quite a lot of literature. And ADB has also some reports and publication that, I'm happy to share if you're interested in that.
Thank you. The second question was on the global biodiversity framework, and it was a question for you, Thomas.
Yes, what exactly was the question regarding the...
My question was on the global biodiversity framework, where we now have target 2 and 3 focusing on inland waters.
Yes.
So I just wanted to know from you how you see out panning out for the work that you're currently doing.
Yes, thank you. And I think the work we are doing on restoring biodiversity is a key component of this, of course. And as I said, we're working a lot on the freshwater systems, but also the marine. We have the EU ambition when it comes to biodiversity as part of the Green Deal, the new restoration law that's coming and will mean a lot of important work to be done. So this is, of course, something that we work on. And one thing that I would like to add, which is a bit outside this source to sea context, but well, we go a bit further out to the sea. We have also the question about biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. So at the end of the day, all this connects. And when we come to global drivers of change, such as climate change, you see how it connects. So we are really looking into this and spending a lot of effort on this, and we'll continue to do so as long as our agency exists. This is our job.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
would like also to give the possibility for a question online if there is anything from the chat. Okay, then I see a last question. Please, you can, the microphone.
Thank you. I'm Amelia Wenger from the Wildlife Conservation Society. It sort of is from your question talking about the challenges in communicating to donors sometimes about how long things take. There's additionally one of the things that we confront when we're implementing Source to Sea projects is communicating to beneficiaries of Source to Sea some of the time lags that just exist from working in a large basin and sort of the ecological time lags where you'd see change. And so I'd just be curious to hear about your experiences on communicating to people when you're trying to sell the concept of Source to Sea, that it might take a long time for those benefits to be realized, even once activities are implemented.
Okay, we have 2 minutes left for this answer. So who wants to make a try? I think we have touched upon the topic already a bit, but does anyone want to react? Louise, I see you.
Well, for the Myanmar case and the Ayeyarwady River, the communication and these sitting down meetings together were, I don't know the details, and I am having a colleague online who will write a link or details to make sure that I'm not saying something wrong. But I think it was a lot of not only talking and illustrating, but there was translating because of the different languages. Burmese is only 3/4 of the population has Burmese as the language. So beyond the maybe technical and difficulties about all the components of the river, all the scenarios that could happen, and that we, of course, based on facts, on transparency, then is communicated in as, I don't know, also my colleague may respond online on what kind of graphics, illustrations, and how we communicated that. Because, and it's not that's I know for sure, it's not a one-time communication. It's this many years, many channels, many kinds of communications ways. And if it's TV, if it's radio, if it's written, if there's so many ways to communicate this, and I'm sure we can all find additional ways to communicate the Source to Sea processes.
Yeah, and I would also really encourage you to look at the website of the Source to Sea platform, because there are also a lot of material that we can use in terms of communication. So we will close this panel discussion. I can confirm that we had fantastic panel members, so thank you so much for that and for being here answering the questions. And Torkil, the stage is yours.
What is the real problem? Nobody will pick up on that, and we will not get across and break those silos. But we seem now to move fast into knowing how we address this. And these cases that we have seen, the ones we saw before and now from Yellow River, Myanmar, and Sweden, are really convincing. So thank you so much. This was a great panel, I think, and we had a great moderator. Thanks a lot. I don't know, I think your hand was for the panel, because Audrey asked for a hand for the panel. Now I ask for a hand for Audrey for goodness. And then this one, we will not ourselves do all the closing, and we will leave that to our highly esteemed partners. And we start with James Dalton from IUCN. You're head of water and land management in IUCN, but IUCN has also a very strong marine component. And you have been listening, and what did you hear? What did you learn, if you learned something, and what do you take from here as you move forward? James, you have 7 golden minutes to tell us that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, firstly, I mean, we went through a range of different topics from Gaston, Thomas, Mustafa, and from Ruth. So I have a diversity of experiences and a diversity of execution as well. I think I was asked to sort of look at this in terms of what did I really take away from challenges, and also where there are some key points and where are there some things that may be potentially missing or that we could take forward further. We've covered things that I think we know about, but being applied at the scale of source to sea is different to being applied within perhaps a singular water resource management project, such as PES schemes. And of course, they're key ways of channeling financing back up the system. And restoring systems and the modeling and data. But I think a few key things came out, and it's also reflected actually in Ruth's first slide. One is there is consistently a lack of guidance because everything is contextually specific. So therefore, we have to be able to take that, the knowledge we have, and make it applicable to a multiple range of agencies. And in the water world, we generally only speak to a particular group of those agencies. So how do we deal with that? And that means that we need to sort of upskill ourselves in that. I think the key thing is also just understanding the river systems as these conveyors. I often increasingly see them as supply chains. They're supplying water, but they're supplying sediment. They're supplying the food that the natural system requires for biodiversity, but also how we interact with that in terms of growing our food from rivers, but also using the food that's within rivers. And therefore, the riparian connection is just as important from a source-to-sea perspective as it is up and downstream. And that, of course, takes us into that conversation which water almost at times fears to tread, which is into land management. And we have a problem with that because we tend to only view land management as agriculture. We don't view it as everything else in between. We don't look at urban centres as hotspots of both extraction and pollution, but also the natural ecosystem that sits between those areas that we use for our own economies. So I think these things have come up across the course of the discussions over the whole day, but in particular with the panel. I think a few key things then. For me, collective action is critical. And in a water sphere, we tend to use multi-stakeholder partnerships to get things done. But to me, this is collective action is taking the multi-stakeholder partnership a level forward. It's not just about exchange of information and sharing knowledge. It's also about that key word of action. So what are we going to do, and who can actually do it, and who can actually finance it? And that's key, and often we don't get to those discussions with multi-stakeholder partnerships. So collective action, I think, is key, bundling sectors and scales together and bringing in land management into that more concretely. And often they probably don't know why they're there, or they're sick of being asked to turn up because they know already they're a polluter, but they're complying with regulation, and therefore what's in it for them? So I think understanding how you mobilize stakeholders from a benefit-sharing perspective of what source-to-sea means to them is important. And that's very much taking the hydrological science into a social understanding about why you get those right people around the table, and are they the right people who can actually do something. Data tools came up, and the methodology for using that information is key, and I think that's also very much like a transboundary conversation. You're bringing different actors together, some of which may not want to actually talk to each other in a very constructive manner, some of which have data that's often not shared between sectors. Some of the times, the private sector has information that the regulator doesn't have any access to. So fixing some of those things through improved partnerships can help data exchange and data information flow. We always talk about the flow of water systems, but we often don't focus not just on the flow and the volumes, which actually most of our water agreements are constructed about, volume, particularly in a transboundary context, but they're not focused enough on water quality. So I think there is a big opportunity to move forward. We know there is huge eutrophication around most of the world's oceans. So we know what the problem is. We just need to try and move those actors in a way that helps fix that. And for that, I think one of the things that we didn't perhaps hear a little bit enough about today, but it was there, was on regulation, and how regulation needs to be improved, and how regulation needs to be improved faster than it has before. A lot of the time we don't have regulators in the room. They're not a key stakeholder. They're under capacity. They're overstretched like everybody else. So maybe they need to be the ones that are brought to the table, and they need more support than perhaps we've been giving them in the past. It has a key role to play. And perhaps as a rather, unfortunately, negative indicator, the EU Water Framework Directive, still not achieved in many member states, still not delivering for what it needs to be doing on good ecological status. So if we can't get it right there in those countries with such high regulation, that gives us a clear indicator of then we're going to find that very challenging in many other countries. So what can we do to accelerate that learning and make it apply more globally? And then just finally, my last piece is that actually I find Source to Sea really helps mobilize that thinking around integrated water resource management, because it's opening up the door not just on the economic return, but on equity, i.e. who gets it along that supply chain of the river system, and also the economic benefits from that, but the environmental sustainability required to maintain those flows, to maintain those systems functioning. And we all know there are rivers that don't reach the sea, and we've all passed over bridges with green rivers due to eutrophication, so we know what the problems are. But I think being able to mobilize those actors through a more collective, actionable approach is more important perhaps than we've realized in the past. And for many single agencies, that's very challenging. Therefore, we desperately need to open up the mandates and build the capacity of those agencies working together, because they're going to find it very struggling, and that's why we face the challenges that we do. So that's all. Thanks very much.
We know what we do when we plan meetings. So when we should find somebody from the platform to listen and take out some key things, who's always critical and point things out, James is it. And I think, James, I mean, a lot of you put your finger on the sore points, and also including, as we have seen with wetlands here, the message that we are also talking land, very much also talking land. But you, as everybody else, say, what does it help that we know everything? We are in Scandinavia. We are rich countries, we are members of EU, and the Baltic Sea is a global hotspot for mismanagement, although we do know everything. So I think you point that out. Regulation is part of that story. Your question about nutrients from agriculture is another part of that story. Thank you so much. We will take that home. Now, I was not supposed to say anything, so I got a red card, but it's too late to pull it down. Heidi, you will close the session. Heidi, you are chief of the Source to Sea unit in the ecosystem division of UNEP. But the unit is called, I like your titles actually, Source to Sea Pollution-Free Unit. So that's what it is, right? You will give us some final reflections from this session and what you think it means for our way forward. Heidi, please.
Thank you very much. I thought you would pick on the name there, since you commented on the zero pollution one. Thank you again for inviting UNEP to be part of this session as one of the members of the Source to Sea platform. I'd like to conclude with just highlighting some final points around what we've been hearing today, and also some additional reflections that I have. What's of course key is we are seeing momentum, and that's extremely important and promising. How do we enhance and make sure that this momentum continues? The issue of partnerships. The Source to Sea platform is an excellent example on how we come together through partnerships to enhance knowledge, to strengthen implementation, and also to share best practices and what has worked, what hasn't worked. Such as this event, for example. This is an opportunity for us to spread the word and also enhance the knowledge sharing. UNEP also convenes, through its program of work, 3 multi-stakeholder global partnerships, also promoting the aspect of Source to Sea. And I know that many of you are also part of your own networks and partnerships. So how can we use these partnerships and platforms, such as the Global Partnership on Plastic Pollution and Marine Litter, the Global Partnership on Nutrient Management, and the Global Wastewater Initiative, from our perspective, to further share knowledge and mobilize additional action on Source to Sea approaches. The second one is financing. We're hearing everyone what's needed, more funding, but also long-term funding. It's not a quick win type of work that we're doing through the Source to Sea approach. It takes time, and it's important that financing is recognized, but also that financing is not siloed, which is another keyword we heard today, but it actually considers financing that runs across ecosystem boundaries and also across sectors and intervention areas. Another area is the fragmentation, which connects to what I mentioned before. I feel like that is really around connecting the dots. It's about connecting the actors, connecting the knowledge, connecting the opportunities that come with the Source to Sea approach. There are also opportunities in digital transformation to help us connect the dots. This could mean both enabling land-sea planning by connecting data systems to map shared resources, ecological flows, and economic flows across source to sea. I also see and hear a call for the strengthened application and support in capacity development on how to carry out the source to sea approach at various levels. And I think this is key. In order to enhance and promote or facilitate political will, it's really around increase the understanding of why we're taking this approach and what are the benefits, that they're not immediate necessarily, but that in the long run, this is essential for an integrated and holistic approach. Inclusivity is key, of course. In order to increase understanding, we have to consider the language barriers that may exist at different levels. We also need to take into account indigenous knowledge and engagement of actors at all levels to enhance and really mainstream the source-to-sea approach. And last but not least, we are in the lead up to the UN Environment Assembly, the 6th one, which is going to take place in Nairobi by the end of February. By increasing knowledge over the next few months, engage further, there may be opportunities for this UNIA 6 to consider this topic. This is, of course, up to the member states to decide, but the more promotion that can be made, the more benefit sharing, the more information that can be provided, I think that can help us all in raising the profile of this important approach. Thank you so much for that, and congratulations on an excellent session.
Thank you, Heidi, for those reflections, and thank you also, UNEP, who has been a key partner for us from the very beginning and used all your programs and all your global networking in support of this agenda. So thank you very much to you, and thanks to your agency. With this, we have come to the end. I thank you all for coming. I also thank all of those unseen who have followed us online. I don't know how many. Thank you so much. And we look forward to keep working with you on this. If you want to know more, the platform is easy to find. If you want help, the platform would love to help you. Connecting the dots, as Heidi said. So thank you very much, and have a good water week.